Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's Toast to the Arts show with Nancy and Lisa. Today, we welcome back Victoria Chick. You know, she's been on our show for years. She's a contemporary figurative artist and early 19th, 20th century print collector. She's based out of Silver City, New Mexico, which is an amazing art community. It's an amazing art destination. So it's in the southwest corner of New Mexico. Many of you know about Santa Fe and Taos. But Silver City is like the rising art community that you want to check out. And she's busy. Not only is she an artist in the community, but she's also working on a project, which it's a big project. It is the Southwest Regional Museum of Art and Art Center. And so we're excited about that happening in Silver City.
I love it.
You know, Victoria had this in her mind and she's like, I want to do this. And it's actually really happening. So we're excited about that. We've talked a lot about it on the shows, but today we're going to talk about actually art museums in general, the ones in the big cities and the ones in the small towns, and what are they like? And, you know, I think they're a big part of a destination, but welcome back. How are you, Victoria?
Oh, thank you, Lisa. I'm glad to be here and talking about my favorite subject.
Yeah,
Art
awesome.
and art museums, you know, and everyone go to victoriachick.com or artistvictoriachick.com. But art museums, this is something, let's just start with this, because go to an art museum, sometimes people will bypass them because they think, oh, la-di-da, I need to know everything about art. And, you know, that could happen, right?
Right. And I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. I guess I go to art museums and have gone to art museums since I was probably 11 or 12 years old, when I really started going to them because my parents took me. And I'm not sure that I ever begged to go at that age, but I was always happy to be there because I'd always see something that I would really like, you know. And I think that's one of the things about, you know, if you could see one painting or one sculpture or one piece of art that you really like on a trip to the museum, I mean, that's the satisfying thing. And
well, it's true. Pictures and sculptures are, other than the printed word, which I love the printed word, and I also love the paintings and the sculptures, but visually, it's easier, at least in my mind, to see a picture than the words. I mean, because it just says it.
yes.
And other than reading, which I also love, but reading is a different kind of medium. And you know, I think most people react to that. It's kind of like why they have stop signs. They're red and they're white and they still say stop, but it's because your mind reacts to a picture first.
Yes. You have a symbol that you're seeing before you read the word.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So I think that pictures, I mean, I think we are meant to look at pictures.
It's, you know,
Yeah. Oh, baby.
Since I've been involved with this, you know, making a museum right now, which is an interesting process. But since I've been involved with that, I have actually gone back and looked at the history of museums, and it's been interesting because it used to be, you know, like I mean, the history of museums in the United States, you know, is not that old.
Not compared to Europe.
People preserve things, you know, certain people preserve things of all kinds of things, you know, historical things, furniture kind of things, art things. And when they would display them, they would used to hang them, and they put the name of the picture, the artist if they knew who that was, maybe when it was done if they knew when that was, and it was they just went around a room and you looked at these objects. And then things changed a little bit. It became more of an educational thing, not just preservation and exhibition, but it became a way to educate the visitors that came so that they would have more of an explanation. They would actually curate a show so that the things that were displayed made sense to have them together. So they would represent, the work of one artist, or they would represent the work of a particular era or a particular group of artists. And that was more interesting, I think, for people because they understood, they could put what they were seeing in a context.
Mm.
And then things have changed. And I would say like in the last 20 or 25 years, museums have shifted again, and they're doing their displays. So there's more of an interaction between the viewer and what's being displayed.
Mm.
So, and they're coming up with all I'll call some museumists, the people that work in museums are coming up with some real novel ways to let people interact. And one of the things that's helped that is the electronic and the video potential that is available now.
Was that kind of like what's happening with the Vincent van Gogh in that immersive experience where people are walking into rooms just surrounded by, sunflowers and, his work, this immersive experience
Right.
where it's almost 3D. It is 3D, I think.
Yeah, and that's a good example because some people then they'll set up a thing where you can try to imitate his brush strokes or his color choice.
Yeah.
So they have more of an idea what was going through Van Gogh's head at the time he was doing it. Maybe not everything that was going through his head because he had a very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's wild. That's wild.
But yeah, all these things are they're interesting, they're educational, and they're entertaining at the same time. So if you can work entertainment into learning, people are a lot more apt to go to a museum.
We have this, for those who are watching this, we have the giant horse, the American horse. This is a sculpture done, and you can see it at the Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it is done by Nina Akamu. Hope I'm saying it correctly. But this was, inspired by Leonardo da Vinci. But when we were there, we were in the summer. Now they're open, right now we're talking, it's winter and snow and ice and all of that. But when we went there, we were in summer and we got on a tram and went around with the tram, and they took us around the garden, and we had this amazing interpreter or curator basically. And they have a museum section on the inside of you go through the botanical gardens, and it's so different. They have a Japanese sculpture area and like a Zen garden, but they have, Pablo Picasso is out there. George Segal, this is where, we were talking about his art. They had an exhibit in there. So it was a traveling exhibit there, and it rotates. But these sculptures are something they're a fixture. So a lot of what we've seen in these kind of museums is that there's the fixture and then it rotates and changes. They have new things coming in all the time. But going around, part of the fun for us was actually going on that tram and hearing just fun stories that when you're walking this in the middle of summer, it's a trek. And those fun stories may go out the window a little bit when you're trekking it so much. You know what it's like to be a day at the zoo or whatever. It's a haul, but you're having such a good time. But going around and having that curator who had such a personality, and also as a journalist, he was a crime reporter, so that was fun. But he was going around telling us the story behind the artists, fun anecdotes about the artists, or just really made it connectable. Like if you didn't know about Pablo Picasso, by the time he drove you by, you wanted to know who Pablo Picasso was, or artists that really, Pablo Picasso is iconic, but artists that you don't know about. He just really, I thought, made it entertaining and made you want to get out of the tram and go up close to the sculptures and be part of it. So when you did go on the trek, it was like this, it was like a treasure hunt. you knew what you wanted to see, and then you got surprises along the way, like, oh yeah, he said this. So that was cool to have that kind of experience. I know that, if it's an indoor museum, you don't get that, but
Sometimes there are museums that have docents, if
yeah.
large enough, they'll have people who are trained, people who are pretty knowledgeable about all the exhibits, and they will take people around. And those are good. I kind of like them because you can ask questions.
Right.
Now, there's another little gizmo that I've seen in some exhibitions, which is an audio thing that you rent it kind of, and you return it when you're through with the exhibit. From a personal standpoint, I try not to use those. I guess it's because I've taken a lot of art history, so I know what I'm looking at for the most part. And sometimes when I go to see something, I will want to go, I see something else. I think, well, I would go check this other thing that I just saw and compare them. And the audio just keeps going.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. It's like,
So
sometimes you want to see it first.
Yes.
And make your own mind up. And then if you want to know more and you want to listen to it, then you can.
I think it's really nice when an individual responds to the art, not to the tag that has the name on it. And now they recognize things. So now they're looking in their mind, they're looking at something important. And they can say, oh, I saw such and such a work, and they give his name, and they're not talking about the work itself or how it affected them, if it did, because not every artwork is going to affect all of us.
Right.
At any given time.
Yeah.
Well, going on the tram experience, it was like an overview of the park because of the way it was set up and how it was the legacy of
It was
Frederick Meyer.
beautiful.
But going on foot, it was a whole night and day difference. It wasn't, and honestly, don't ask me where the Pablo Picasso sculpture was. Don't, because I can't tell you. But I will tell you, we found things along the way that just were mind blowing. And you just, each, I think it's so personal. Art is so personal. But it is, I encourage people to go. I think, honestly, one of a fun date I went on was the San Diego Art Museum. And it was with my date and his family. And that's where we saw Escher. Escher's art. It was and we were at that exhibit. And
I remember seeing that show. It was amazing.
Did we even know you at that time? I don't know if we knew you even at that time. It was amazing. And going through that exhibit, I was just like, wow. I mean, I'd heard of it and seen some art, but then being there in that art, and then also being in the museum itself where the security were like, do not get too close to the picture.
Well, yes.
Not supposed to touch it.
Part of seeing something in person, like you see a book and it's got an Escher picture, or you see a cocktail table book, and it's got Picasso's work in it, and you think you know what it looks like, but the reproductions in magazines, the slick reproductions, don't let you understand the brush strokes, the texture.
Yeah. This is texture
that even a good reproduction doesn't pick up. So I know when I was teaching art history, I would always, kind of make an assignment that they had to go to a museum so many times and write about it. But it was for some people that's kind of drudgery, but for a lot of people it was wonderful because they came back and they would say, I never realized something, whatever it was about somebody's work or somebody's painting. And it was an eye opener, because also one of the things you can't tell from a reproduction is the scale, the size of the object that you're looking at, or the painting that you're looking at. So it's really important to be able to see art in person.
It's like if you look at a photograph of a dog or a cat, as good as those photos may be, it is not the same as the live dog or cat. It's just not.
Right.
It's just not. It's not 3D.
Anybody who's ever been on vacation and takes a view of the mountains or the ocean or whatever, and they get their pictures back, it's kind of disappointing because because what you think of, what you see
Yeah.
in real life as being huge, now is this tiny little thing on a 5x.
Well, the
Even
puzzle,
even
it's a-
taking photographs of places, you know, you see something and it's not the
Mm.
same on a little screen of a computer.
but the personal
not.
experience is different than a static representation of what you saw.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's why people need to travel and go and see it for themselves.
But that's something about museums I wanted to bring up, the difference between a museum and a gallery, because galleries, you're seeing something current. Sometimes you see something that's a real collector's piece, you
Sure.
know, you see those too. But in a museum, I mean, we've been to museums, I'm going to get its name right. I know we've talked about them on the show before in El Cajon, I think it is. Is it El Cajon or La Mesa? The Oleg, is a Southwestern artist. Oh my gosh, Wikstrom, I'm gonna have to Google it while we're talking, but he's a very famous Southwest artist and he has a huge portion of this museum in this small downtown kind of area.
Which town?
And
Well, I
Olaf
think
Wikstrom,
George Pippin, I can think of, I can think of, I can think of some Western artists and some museums in Oklahoma. They may not be the one.
Which
George
town,
Pippin is the one.
Lisa?
I was thinking in El Cajon, California. Olaf Wikstrom or Olaf.
Oh,
Oh, Olaf.
Weghorst.
Yeah, okay, you know who I mean.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Olaf
Okay.
Wikstrom. That now here's
He was really from El Cajon, California.
Yeah, El
Mm.
Cajon. That's what I was saying.
Yeah,
El Cajon. That I wasn't saying. I was saying El Cajon, California. But you
Yeah.
go in the museum and it's dedicated to the Western. It's not just him, but when you're in there. So this to me was, it blew my mind. It was one of those museums I went in thinking, okay, here we go, bunch of old saddles, and no offense to old saddles, they're incredibly interesting. But
Right.
here we see this man's work that I've heard of, and you think El Cajon, dusty cowtown kind of thing, you know what I mean? East County, get in there, and oh my God, this guy is incredible. So he's from there. They have him in, and he's in other museums. Prescott, I've seen his work in
Right.
Prescott, Wickenburg. I've seen his art in a lot of areas, and he's incredible. But here it was in his hometown. And I went, okay, like, hello, this guy is really good. So to me, this was above the gallery standard, but at the same time, you need him in the museum because he's from there, and you know what I mean? So that's where I wanted to go about that difference, because he's been in I've seen his work in galleries and in museums.
Right.
Yeah, but where he grew up and where he worked, that's history.
Yes.
And that's history. That's different than seeing Leonardo da Vinci paintings everywhere. That's not where he's from everywhere. He's only really from one place. He may have studied in different places, but he was born in one place. So that's
Yeah.
the difference.
I think what going back to what you were saying about being surprised, where you find some of these things. I went to a museum in I was just on a trip. I wasn't particularly wanting to look at art, but we went by this on the highway. We went by the sign that said Springerville Art Museum, and I thought, oh well, that's kind of interesting. But we didn't stop in. We went back a couple of days later because we didn't have anything else to do, and I was so amazed at this museum. It was and this is a wonderful, it's a wonderful experience to anybody to go somewhere and just be so blown away by what is in a museum. Maybe it's just because it's a surprise, but when the work is so outstanding, and when you read the history of this museum, to me, it was even more outstanding because it was in a high school, a former high school. And it was started in 1901. A couple of artists gave some work to the high school because they thought the kids should be able to see good art. And that happened there. Some other artists gave some the next year. Well, then by the third year, the students were so excited, they started earning money to at the end of the year, buy a painting for the school as a gift to the school.
Oh, cool.
This went on for years and decades. that the students did this. And
Hmm.
they had such a collection that they started to hung it in the hallways initially.
Hmm.
By 1960s, 63 or 64, somewhere around there, the population had grown so much that they had to have a new school. And what were they going to do with this art collection? So
Hmm.
the town that by this time, and the city by this time, were invested in the idea that this is, all this art was important. And so they gave the school building, the old high school building, to the they organized a new board of trustees, but they gave it over completely to as an art museum.
Wow.
And it's still going, and they've added on to it twice
Hmm.
since then. And I mean, I really recommend, if anybody is in that area of Utah, it is well worth your time to go to spend there looking at the art.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, when you think about kids being involved in that
Right.
and spearheading it,
Hmm.
that's amazing, and what I would like to interview them to see
Yeah,
how it impacted their lives.
It really emphasizes how people respond, and young people respond to visual art.
This is so true. Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, especially in recent times, visual art is not available in a lot of school systems anymore.
Hmm.
Right.
So it's really important, I think, to look at this from a historical standpoint, that what can be done. I mean, how it can take off and inspire, decades of students.
I think
Yeah.
it's also really important for regions to have it because it's also part of, like, talking about the Western art, like, El Cajon is on the map for him and Frank Zappa, by the way. But anyway, but I mean, and El Cajon has grown so much more over the years. So I really, it's a good destination, people. But I just want to say, but that's something that, like what you're doing with, the Fine Art Museum for Silver City in the Southwest region of where you are in New Mexico, is a huge deal because it puts it on a tourist map. It adds value and shows the values. I mean, there can be all these values. In other words, all this amazing art in a region, but if you can't see it and it's not accessible, you don't understand the value unless you see it. And it does go beyond a print brochure, a magazine, even though we run
Absolutely.
magazines or any of that.
Yeah.
It really does.
And,
You had mentioned galleries. What's the difference between galleries and museums? And I mean, that made me think of Silver City, because we've got a lot of art galleries. I mean, we're only a 10,000 population town, and we've got nearly 20 art galleries here at any given time. So
that's awesome.
Art is really good, but you see, in a gallery, the difference between a gallery and a museum is that the gallery is trying to sell work. That's their business, whereas a museum is preserving work and exhibiting it. It's not for sale. So museums collect work based on
value.
Well, not monetary value, but
no, not.
what-
I'm not talking about
what-
monetary value. It's about historic value.
yes. Thank you. And how it fits into what they already have, so they can tell. The exhibit becomes a narrative thing about the art.
When at one time I was taking tours to Kenya, and one of the stopovers was in Copenhagen or Amsterdam, and there was an air controller strike, so we ended up there for 3 days, and everybody was like complaining, but it's like, just go walk from the hotel, and I discovered there was a museum about Rodin, the sculptor. And so I went in, and I, number one, couldn't believe it was free. And I knew who he was, and I'd seen many pictures of his sculptures, But going into the gallery where the sculptures actually were, and a lot of them were replicas. There's only like, I think 2 or 3 originals, and they were crumbling, and I could see the difference between the real ones and the replicas. But I have to say, my idea of sculpture changed when I could see the actual like sculpted thing
Yeah.
as opposed to a picture of it. It's a whole different world.
Yes.
It, and I don't know how to put it into words, but it came with, it's like, it was almost like meeting people
Mhm.
in a way. It was
Yes.
more live somehow, because when you have a painting, it's painting, but when you have a sculpture, it's 3D in a way, because you can go around it. Like a painting, maybe a 3D painting, like it has depth and all that, but you can't go see the back of, like if somebody paints a barn, you don't see the back of it.
Oh, Victoria, please paint the back of your paintings for us.
No,
now.
but you know what I'm saying? But a sculpture,
Yeah.
you walk around it, it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
I mean, I love them both. I love both art forms, but that's where I first really went, wow. And I know this was an ancient dude, he's historical. I knew his name. I went to art school, and I, but when I actually got to see it, I had a whole new appreciation for nothing in the course that I took prepared me for seeing it real.
Yeah, it's that point is existing in the same space that you're in. So
Yeah.
you have that. It's a more immediate. I mean, and you're right. It's like seeing. I mean, an old friend. You've seen a picture of it. Now you're meeting it in person.
Yeah.
It really does make a difference.
It's
Mhm.
totally different.
And paintings too. And because I think there is the ability to actually
Mhm.
see size, when you're looking at something in print in a magazine or a coffee table book, you're never getting the true perspective of size. I
No.
don't care if people put a quarter next to it and all that. You just don't. I mean, you just can't get it. And it's like when you
Mhm.
see it on the wall, even if it's teeny, then you get it better than if you're seeing it in a
Yeah.
book. I mean, it just is
Yes.
true.
Yeah.
You've got teeny
Mm.
pictures. Those, well,
What's
no,
that
but
mean?
but to see them in a book versus seeing them in person is a night and day difference,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You pick up the quality of the materials that they're made out of. Which
Well,
you miss entirely in a reproduction of book.
yeah, you can't see the texture really.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, paintings smell. You
Oh,
don't pick
there's a smell.
all they do. And you don't pick that up in a book.
Yeah.
I don't know. The galleries to me, there's just this, when you go to gallery, it's like a library and like a graveyard. And I mean this in a good way. It's a very respectful place. So there's a
Mhm.
calming to it. You can have discussion, but it's quiet.
Yeah.
It's have peace and let
Like a
other people have.
library.
That's what I said. It's
Mm.
like a library and a graveyard. There's respect. You can have discussion. You can talk. But there's this respect of other people's experiences, which I think is really a unique experience. When you go to music, we're all partying, or people are in your face while you're trying to see the band perform or whatever, but when you're in a gallery, a library, all of those things,
Yeah.
calm down. And by the way, graveyards to me also have some amazing art. I'm just going to say that's a whole other art
Oh
thing.
yeah, they
do.
do.
In fact, that should be a whole another segment.
We'll do it.
Let's do
Graveyard
it. I
art.
find
I
graveyard
like
art
it,
to me is
graveyard
fascinating.
art, because and it's not only the first thing you see when you walk through graveyards is the wealthy people have all the ornaments, but we've found that that's not always true.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Mhm.
But yeah,
It is interesting.
the museum part, I think it's, and then you think about how towns got them, like how much work you're going into it. I mean, how much work goes into this to get an actual bona fide fine art museum in a town.
Mm.
You think about
Now-
these icons in cities around the world.
You know,
Huge ones.
there's so much more to it than hanging pictures on a wall or moving stuff in. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an eye-opening experience for me, because to delve into it and read what should be done, what needs to be done, what can make it better, why things have failed with art museums. I mean, there's so much to think about.
Well, there's
what
the
we're doing.
there's the business side, there's
Right.
the marketing side,
Yep.
and then there's the preservation side, which is
Exactly.
huge, because you have to, whatever you procure for that museum, you have to be able to protect it.
Yep.
Save it. I mean,
And
it's when you think of it, that's a huge project.
You know, when you're trying to start something that will last, you know, in forever, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think it will, but that's your intention is that after
Yeah.
you're gone, this is continue.
It's going to be there. Yeah.
And we have in every museum there are directors or trustees that protect
Mhm.
what your mission is, what your
Yeah.
initial mission is. Sometimes you have to change a few regulations because things change. You get bigger maybe, and it requires more personnel, more regulations, and so forth. But the directors are committed. I think in every museum, they represent the community where the museum is,
Mhm.
and they have to put aside any kind of conflict of interest that they might have, where they might gain financially, so that they have to be squeaky clean as far as that goes, and their whole goal is to make a benefit for the community that they're in.
Mhm.
So and people don't know about the directors.
Well, they
They
don't,
see
because
they see an energy, and they see pictures, or they see, you know, whatever kind of artwork it is.
They don't see the
They
behind.
don't
Yeah.
think about how it got there.
yeah,
Or how it continued.
exactly.
And these people,
Exactly.
and a lot of museums are free, and the reason that they're free is because the directors have been out for a long time. You know, several iterations of directors have worked to build an endowment so that eventually the museum doesn't require any entry fee.
Yeah.
That's hard. And it's hard in
Mhm.
these days right now, when the arts took a knock over the last 10, 15, 20 years. I think the arts,
Yeah.
not just in schools, but nonprofits not getting the sustenance they need,
Yeah.
it's really gone down to individuals giving towards, what they care about,
Yes.
which is hard because at the same time, you've got to think about people who don't know that you have to recruit them. You got to let them know that they're interested in art. They may not know yet, but we're going to get you there.
Well, when we first started talking about doing this topic, I began to think about all the museums I'd ever been to in person, and how many of them were started by one person or a few people or a family.
Right.
And then they grew because other people could see the vision, and they could see how, what they have an art collection, they have a painting that's particularly fine. What's going to happen to it when they die? And they decide that they don't want to keep it hidden. They want to give it to the public. They want everybody to be able to enjoy it. And that's really a selfless thing, I think, because they're not going to get anything out of it.
There's that, and then there's the museums are built on a family legacy where
like Frederick Meyer.
They die and they have this legacy, and there's really maybe no one left to leave it to, or they just want it to be public. And so there's those two kinds of legacies.
I
And
think that's huge because it's the legacy,
Mhm.
but it's to be accessible. I mean, that's something, as we travel, it's public art, public spaces, right? We're trying
Yeah.
to find, most parks are free or cost effective for families to go in, right?
Yeah,
That's the same thing with art museums,
Mm.
going in and being accessible to see these great pieces of art, people that you didn't know. I mean, the Escher exhibit, right, when it was in San Diego, but I
Mm.
was so blown away about art that I've read about, heard about, and art that I've never known about. Escher was very new to me, and then I was like, holy cow, this is insane. But to be able to be
Mm.
accessible, you shouldn't have to be, you know, rich to appreciate art, basically.
oh, no,
So,
no,
and
No.
that's what I think is so important about public. We've talked about public art for years, and we cover public art with you.
Mm.
That and most public art is commissioned and vetted and judged and juried and all of that, and the artist gets paid for it, and the public gets to enjoy it. And I think that's part of that role with a lot of museums. Some do have to charge a cover. It just
Yeah.
depends on who, what, and where,
Well,
Mhm.
it takes a long time to get an endowment together that
Mm.
makes an institution very stable and able to operate. Because when you think of all the size of most museums and the amount of utilities they have to pay, for instance, and the amount of
And the
supplies they
staff,
have to
yeah.
carry and all that stuff. So the costs are there,
insurance.
right? And
Exactly.
so, I mean, most museums can't afford to insure their art. I mean, there's no way they can't get it back, once it's
Yeah.
gone, it's gone. So what they're mostly concerned with is liability.
Mm.
But
Look at
still,
the Mona
Security.
Lisa.
yeah,
Mona Lisa's been around the world and been stolen how many times?
yeah. The American Museum Association recommends that a museum charge whatever is the going rate for like going to a movie in your area.
Mm.
So that if your movie
That
costs
makes sense.
$8,
That makes sense.
But then there's also a lot of things that you can do to bring that cost down or get rid of it entirely at certain days. Like for instance, our museum is going to have to charge a fee, an entrance fee, but we're also going to have free days. We're going to all children will always be free, or senior citizens will get a big reduced rate. So I mean, we have to do that because we're starting out. But that doesn't mean that we don't have fundraisers and that sort of thing to gradually build our
Mm.
our account up and invest our money so that it will get more money that we can eventually be free.
Mm.
Everybody.
That makes sense.
That's awesome. I mean, it takes time. It's really interesting hearing you go through this process and everyone
Yeah.
that's working with you on this project. Because there's
Yeah.
a bunch of
We
people,
just-
a lot of people have donated art, people working behind the scenes, but it's so interesting to hear this process because I think
Mhm.
again, we're going back to that value word that people get to understand, like the museum just didn't pop up.
No,
You know?
no, it's a big cultural benefit, and not everybody realizes it immediately. But I think it's established and there, people who haven't gone to a museum ever before stop in. They have a good time. Their kids go. They see things they've never seen before, or they look at things in a different way, and they start talking. They're talking to each other about it. So there's a lot of good things that that are beyond preservation, beyond just looking, because now you're sharing and communicating.
Well, there's that old idea about libraries and museums
Yeah.
that's for old people, and researchers, that kind of thing.
Oh, bite
And
me.
it's no, but I mean, there is that attitude out there, and nothing could be further than the truth. And I think part of it stems from when you're in school and they take a busload of kids into a museum or a library, first thing they tell them is to be quiet you
Yeah,
know, and that's a big downer right there,
yeah,
because now you can't react to what you're seeing. And I get that
Mm.
they're supposed to be quiet and respectful, but for a child who's discovering something and is verbal about it, to be told to be quiet might not be the best. Just let them talk.
That's right, Nancy.
yeah.
Yeah. No,
And,
seriously. I
a good docent or a good,
Mm.
part of our project is a museum, but the other part of that is an art center. And we're trying to, it's art, involves art making for various ages. We can do classes for various ages, but the kids are really important
yeah.
because you could use the museum
Mhm.
itself to stimulate them. You could use other
Right.
things to stimulate them, and that's where the interactive approach works
Mhm.
working really well, because the kids get excited, and they're
Right.
and if it's set up in an interactive way, they have an outlet for their excitement, and it's appropriate in the museum for them to be excited about what they're seeing. So
Mhm.
it may be that you don't want to mix up kids group with a bunch of adults. I don't know. Some people, might not. Older people might not be able to handle it, but it's really important. It's really really important to have that.
Well, you can have school
Mm.
days that are kind
Yeah.
of, this is a school day, everybody know about it ahead
Yeah.
of time, especially when it's a smaller community,
Mm.
and it'll be a smaller building, like the bigger
Right.
building. I think there's different things you can do
Yeah.
about that. But if the youth aren't ever getting that opportunity, if they don't get that opportunity, art will not be protected. So the museums will lose everything that they're thinking of doing if we do not involve the youth. I mean,
Right.
as a child, I mean, going to a museum's got to, I mean, even the other day, you said you went to a museum in San Antonio
Yeah.
to see, yes, and that had a huge impact on you.
Go.
But the artist you went to see was a huge
And
impact.
the fun thing about that was we were there. They had an interactive thing. Interactive doesn't have to be a big Megillah here, but they had a light table out, and the work was Wayne Thiebaud's work, and some of his prints had a lot of cross hatching and cross hatching, and they were trying. They just had almost like line drawings of what he had done, and the kids were, were there pencils and paper out there, and you put it on the light table, and you put the crossing and cross hatching.
Oh, I get it. Yeah.
They could see how you could make shadows that way, and they were very involved in that.
Cool.
Once a
That's
week.
awesome.
Yeah, so it was a very simple thing, but
Mm.
they were learning
But
how
it
to
makes
make,
it
how to use
makes,
shadows to make 3 dimensions.
but it makes it relative to them. They can,
Yeah.
if they can do it, they can understand it,
Yes.
as opposed to being just talked to.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between being talked to
Yeah.
and physical experience.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Awesome. I love
That's
that.
awesome that they did that. So that was in San Antonio.
Wow.
And so this is an example of you driving to go and see a specific exhibit. And so, because a lot of the museums have these traveling exhibits, like the Van Gogh, Wayne Thiebaud, like you were talking about, they all have these. Here's your regular, like we always talk about DeGrazia Gallery in art. This is a museum; it's a historical landmark, and they have their main collection of Ted DeGrazia art, and then the rest is rotating exhibits and guest artists and things like that. But their whole component is this educational part where they have kids going in and but people travel to that museum every year to see the new exhibits and to see the spring. They have a Lent experience, like every Lent series that they put on it. And Lance, the director, is like, if we don't put the Lent series up,
the
Way of the Cross exhibit,
Yeah, they're in trouble.
they will get phone calls, faxes, emails,
Well,
social
that
media.
has now become a
It's a thing.
cultural experience for the community.
Right.
Every year they have to put that up at Lent, the Way of the
Yeah.
Cross.
Yeah, they have to.
It's interesting how that happens. And this is all over one person's art.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
but he was a
there's
part
there
of that
are-
community, so.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are not a lot of art galleries that just feature one person's art, but there are quite a number of them in the United States. There's one in Kansas, Berger San Zane,
Mm.
called an art gallery, but it's really a museum. And if there's a little bit of other people's work there, but basically
Yeah,
it's
they still have a little, yeah.
right. There are others, like there's one down in Marfa, Texas. There's another place where an artist, actually a living artist, started a foundation down there, and his name was Donald Judd, and he was sort of a minimalist sculptor. But the town of Marfa has grown because he founded this art foundation, and there's a sculpture park and all kinds of, now there's other art museums or not museums, galleries there. So
And spaceships.
yeah, so it's one thing begets another very, very often. Very
Even
often.
the
I know.
Prada,
I
Prada
mean,
store.
Marfa is known for aliens and
the lights, the
spaceships
Marfa
landing,
lights.
the Marfa lights and all that. We hung out there for a little bit. It's really,
Did you? Yeah.
yeah,
A little
it's,
bit. We
it's
wanted
a
to stay
tiny
longer.
bit. It
But
was,
we did go to the Prada shoe store. Everybody
Yeah.
has to go to the Prada shoe
I
store.
know,
And it's
it was
like its own
interesting.
little, it's a museum in itself on the way in.
Well,
It's a
yeah, and
whole
it's like a
other-
pair of shoes
It's a
under,
roadside attraction.
yeah,
And then after you drive out, don't forget to go to the thing.
the thing, you have to go
Have
see
you
the
been to the
thing.
thing, Victoria?
Well, the thing is over by Arizona, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, I
Yeah.
think you get
You
on the
know,
way there.
I have
Mhm.
never been to the thing.
Oh.
Mike has been there, and he won't tell me anything about it. He says you have
No,
to.
there's a mummy.
You
There's
have
a
to
mummy.
go there.
There's a mummy at the thing.
No, you can't tell. You have to go
Apparently there's a
there.
mummy. I
You
want to go
know,
to
you
see the
can't
mummy.
tell. You
But
can't
the mummy,
tell. No, stop
There's
it.
a mummy at the
No.
thing. They put it on their advertising. There's a mummy
know.
at the thing.
But you have to go there.
Yeah.
I've
It's-
seen, you know what? I've seen several mummies in my lifetime, and the worst one was in Pretoria, the mummy who was wrapped except for one big toe. And it was in the museum. And a friend of mine pointed out, we're like, oh, and it was pelting down rain, and we were trapped in the museum because this rainstorm was so bad, and we were stuck in the hall with the mummy, and we could see the toe. I'm like, is that real flesh? It's like, is it paper mache? What is it? But it was rotting. And I was like, dude, this is gross. But no,
Well,
seriously.
but this is
But
an interesting part of it. That's an
it-
art. Embalming is part of art.
I know, but its toe
It's an
was
art.
hanging out, and you'd think they'd cover it or something. But I mean, and I wonder, like now, if I went back there and saw the same mummy, the mummy, would the toe be totally gone? And because I'm talking years ago,
Depends
it-
on what they've done with the
would it?
temperature.
Yeah, I know. Would it shrivel up? I mean, it was weird that it was still there because it's a mummy from like a 5, 6, 700,000
I
years
don't
ago.
know.
I don't know how long ago, but why was it still there?
Maybe it's a relative from the thing.
It wasn't wrapped
Well,
properly.
I don't know. But I wanted to
But-
touch on this about art museums also having art that's different. So
Mm.
in Las Vegas, there's a museum of neon lights. And neon
Yes.
lights is kind of a
Mhm.
design thing, right?
Yeah.
It's
Neon,
the era.
all neon
yeah.
signs are going away, cost and all, we have a friend that Jeroen and Maggie that travel the country when they're allowed in the country and document, whatever neon advertising and lights and signs that they can. And it's amazing what they have captured. And
Yes.
unfortunately, a lot of it is going away as they were doing it,
I know.
and they're doing
Sad.
it to preserve it in some way. But then there is like a museum dedicated to that to preserve this, which is huge cost. And that is a form of art. But
Oh,
these-
gosh, yes,
Of
yeah.
course, and it's
Yeah.
history. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
history.
I mean, it started out as commercial, and
Yes.
it was that medium of
Mhm.
light and gas was adopted by
Exactly.
artificial sculptors. So
See?
yeah,
It's like
So-
Charles Schultz. He's got a museum He's got a museum too. Is it Schultz? Schultz?
Who are you
The
talking about?
Peanuts dude. Oh, I'm getting his name wrong.
Oh, Charles Schultz.
Yeah, Charles Schultz. He's got a museum dedicated to him. I mean, he should. Presidents have libraries. Artists should have their own museums. Or
Well,
be part of
yeah.
a fine art museum that's a collective. To me, it's awesome that
But
people
it's
aren't
all
selling the art.
it's all part of history.
Mhm.
You know, when you go back and other generations try to understand what we did when we were here and why we did what we were here, the only thing they're going to have to go on is what's left behind, which would be museums, books, and
Artifacts.
and probably audios and television things will be kept, which is a lot better than like what former generations had to look at, which was here's your set of bones. You know what I mean? As
What-
generations go forward, there's a lot more left that is preserved.
Right.
So future generations can actually really understand what was going on.
Interesting.
That
This is
makes
cool
sense.
stuff. So
Mhm.
everyone, victoriachick.com, keep up with her website. She's on our show. My gosh, this is so cool. Every third no, I'm getting it wrong now. See, here we go with the new thing. You think I can't look at my notes, but it is, it is every third Saturday. Victoria's on the show. And sometimes, Victoria, we're going to be talking about Silver City too, to talk about what's going on in the world in Silver City, New Mexico. And sometimes it'll be art history. And we talk about all kinds of things with you over the years. So looking forward to this series. And everyone, victoriachick.com is the website, and keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. But thank you for joining us.
Well,
Yeah.
I always enjoy it. I always enjoy talking to you, and I will look forward to the next session we have.
Yes.
Cool.
And it's so good to see you too. And your
I
paintings
know.
on the wall behind you. That's
Oh,
I
really
know.
cool.
The cat's
cool.
playing with your hair.
Yes, and that's called figurative
looks like-
art, Nancy.
That's called dinner time.
Yes. Oh,
It's
there. See,
cool.
well,
It's
Nancy's
cool.
got the horse tail coming out of her ear, and apparently my head is up the horse's.
We're well
Well,
surrounded
alrighty then.
by animal life.
There it is.